Hi everyone, welcome to Math Tutor Katie. This is Katie and today's topic is perfect squares and perfect cubes. Let's start with the definition of these two terms. Perfect squares, these are the number that you get when you multiply two equal numbers. So what that means, when you have 3 and you multiply by itself, which is 3, the number that you get is 9. This is called the perfect square. In notation, since we multiply 3 two times, we're going to write that number at the top of the number that you multiply. And you read it as 3 squared. So let's do some examples. 2 squared means 2 times 2, which is 4. 3 squared is 3 times 3, 9. 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16. 5 squared, 5 times 5, 25. The list goes on, and we're going to write it up to 10 squared. 6 times 6, 36. 7 squared, 7 times 7, 49. 8 squared, 8 times 8, 64. 9 squared, 9 times 9, 81. And last one, 10 times 10, which is 100. So these are just the examples of perfect squares. But if you can recognize these numbers, it will be very useful when you're solving questions. So these are all perfect squares. Let's do some examples. So which of these numbers is a perfect square? So 25, 64, 125, 225, 1, 0, -4, -9. So we've got 8 numbers, and we're going to go over one number at a time. So 25 is 5 times 5, so that is a perfect square. 64 is 8 times 8, so that is also a perfect square. 125, there is no number that gives us product as 125 when we multiply twice, so this is not a perfect square. 225, that is also a perfect square because when you multiply 15 times 15, that is 225, so that is perfect square. Number 1 is 1 times 1, which is perfect square, so that is good. And 0 is 0 times 0, so technically it is a perfect square because we are multiplying a number by itself. -4, if it was +4, then it will be a perfect square, but since there is negative sign, so this won't be a perfect square. Same as the -9, so this won't be a perfect square. So there is a little note that you need to remember. Perfect squares cannot be negative. Okay? So which means all of the perfect squares will be positive. That's you need to remember. So I think that is enough for perfect squares. Let's go over perfect cubes. So perfect cubes are the product, a number that you get when you multiply an integer by itself 3 times this time instead of 2 times. So the square, if you have a squares, that means you're multiplying 2 times. If it is cubes, then it will be 3 times. So for example, when you have 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. So since we're multiplying 2 3 times, it is a perfect cube. And when you're writing this way, the product, we can simplify it using the exponent form, using the exponents. So since we multiply 3 times, we're going to write that the number of times that you're multiplying at the top corner, and you write it as 3 cubed. You read it as 3 cubed. That. So here's an example of perfect cubes. 3 cubed is 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. We can have -1 as the number that we're multiplying. So when you have a -1 cube, that means you're multiplying -1 times, -1 times, and -1, which is -1. So unlike the perfect cubes, we can have negative number as a cube, perfect cubes, and we can also have a positive number as perfect cubes. So unlike perfect squares, perfect cubes can be both positive and negative. So let's do some example. So which of the following a perfect cube is a perfect cube? So we got 27, 121, -1, +8, maybe -8, 64, -9, and 1. So 27 is 3 times 3 times 3, so that is a perfect cube. 121, that's 11 times 11. It is a perfect square, but it's not a perfect cube, so it won't be the answer. -1 is multiply -1 times -1 times -1, so it is the perfect cube. +8, it is also a perfect cube because 2 times 2 times 2 is equal to 8. -8 is also a perfect cube because if you multiply -2 instead of +2, you will get -8. 64 is 8 times 8, so that means 4 times 4 times 4, which is perfect cube. -9, this is not a perfect cube because it's just the 3 times -3, so this is not the answer, but 1 is a perfect cube because 1 times 1 times 1. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Please leave me any comments or send me an email if you have any questions. See you next time.